On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. This week's On Story, Machete and From Dusk Till Dawn screenwriter Alvaro Rodriguez. And Masters of Horror and Fear Itself screenwriter Mick Garris.
The more powerful it is, the more relatable it is, because so many things are universal. And, you know, Cronenberg was one of the leaders of this movement of intelligent horror. None of us are going to defend the slaying of teenagers in a abandoned cabin in the woods movies, but this is what horror is about.
In this episode, Alvaro Rodriguez and Mick Garris discuss David Cronenberg's sci-fi body horror classic, The Fly.
Oh no. What's happening to me? Am I dying?
The best horror movie, you know, Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist or this or, you know, any number of really great genre films are films you could read them and go, wow, this is great. This is a great story. These are great characters. This is fascinating. I can't stop turning the pages.
Yeah, and the movie like The Fly and the Cronenberg body horror films, to me, are never been as relevant or as timely as they are now.
And in The Fly, though, it is much more elemental, but it's a different kind of emotional resonance because it's about love. It's about falling in love and what peels the layers of that onion apart from within. And I think one of the reasons it was so successful is that despite its quite grotesque imagery and this body horror, it's really emotional. And it's about a romance that's ripped asunder by science.
I think that's something that is often overlooked in so many horror movies, where, you know, it's just a tally of murders, it's a tally of kills, you know, and there's not an investment in the characters. And almost immediately, the end of the credit sequence, which is supposed to represent what it would be like to look through a fly's eyes, fly vision, almost like a dreamlike thing that's happening at the beginning, that comes right into this real world space and brings us into these characters, which I think is also very indicative of you know, the thinking mind of the writer, director, and visionary that David Cronenberg is.
And it's filmmakers like David Cronenberg who allow us to not have to be apologists for this genre, because so much of it is dire and reprehensible and unskilled and unintelligent. There are so many people working within this field like David that make us able to say, look, this is the best stuff being made.
It's almost like what you would see in a screwball romantic comedy at the beginning, where these two characters, you know, one maybe is pursuing the other, but one wants nothing at all to do with that guy, you know, and she's very, you know, she's not believing his lines, and she's kind of cutting him down a little bit, you know.
Oh, you could come back to my lab. Listen, I'll make a cappuccino. I have a Fiamma of my very own. You know what that is? It's not the Dilettante's plastic kitchen model. It's one of those real restaurant espresso machines with an eagle on top. And...
Somehow I get the feeling you don't get out much.
You can tell that?
Yeah.
actors. You've got two movie stars at the time, and movie stars were not well known for being in genre films. It's a gutter genre to most of Hollywood. And the legitimacy of these two actors playing these roles and the intelligence of their dialogue and the wit of it, and the fact that this was produced by Mel Brooks, of all people, it really makes it stand out and becomes evident from that very moment.
There's something that's automatically very engaging about Jeff Goldblum as a character in this thing. You know, he's not the mad scientist kind of cliche. There's something that's very alluring, that's very sort of just his mannerisms, the way that he speaks, the way he's delivering this dialogue. I saw a documentary on Richard Linklater the other night, Matthew McConaughey, talking about, you know, you don't want an actor to act, you don't want an actor to perform, you want an actor to behave. And I think Jeff Goldblum is an actor who behaves, you know, even though that there's a certain flair in his stuff, it feels very real, it feels very human. And I think that's one of the most compelling things about the movie, even before any of the horror stuff, is that it's going to take a little time, not too much, but just enough to hook us with these characters.
In a way, it's a mad scientist story.
Yeah.
And yet this mad scientist is somebody who's charming and interesting. He has the ego of a scientist or a doctor and the social graces of an idiot. You know, but it's a really interesting, complex character with a sense of humor, who also has an idea, and he has something special, and it's scientific in nature, that when you peel it apart and tell somebody what it's about, it's ridiculous. But, you know, that this man and fly merge bodies eventually.
Right.
And yet it's played so real by these actors that you take for granted as real human beings because of your familiarity with them and the intelligence of their characters. It becomes something more than just a horror film.
When that bloody hand hits the window, that is that first like little jump scare in the movie, and it's not excessive, but there's something, and even that thing, it's not scary, but there's something very unnerving about it. This idea of, you know, being transformed or being turned inside out, something like that. It has no resemblance to the baboon that was in there before. It almost looks like a dog head, and you're already hooked because of the human element that was presented first, and now you're hooked on another level.
I saw it in a full theater in 1986, and it's a giant jump. But what's interesting about what's to come is that the fear and the grotesquerie comes from our own bodies. You know, these are things, it's really only been in recent history where the body has been hidden. Death has been hidden away from us. We never see that process. It's taken apart in you know, autopsies and mortuaries, things like that, away from our view. Everyone is lying in state after they've been embalmed and on view, preserved, so they look like, supposedly like when they were alive. But the body itself has become a source of horror, and the invasion of the body from within, or in this case from without and starting over from within, is shocking and jolting because there's nothing more intimate than our own blood and viscera. And these are things, as I said earlier, the revolution of our own bodies in this unbelievably grotesque sense as it comes disassembled and reassembled in a different form completely is really the source of much of Cronenberg's horror.
I think if he's known for a particular brand of horror, it is this idea of sort of losing control of part of yourself, part of your body. The body horror genre is often, you know, as a label used to describe his work, with movies like Shivers, That Came From Within, Rabid. This idea of something growing within you. There's a moment in the film in which Jeff Goldblum is, you know, describing what's happening to him as maybe a bizarre kind of cancer. And I think that that's the perfect epitaph or way to describe the kinds of things that Cronenberg is interested in, the bizarre growth inside you that you may or may not be able to control.
In general cellular chaos and revolution, I'm just gonna disintegrate in a novel way, no doubt. And then I'll die. And then it'll be over.
No. I don't accept that. There must be something we can do, somebody we can go to, a test that can be done.
No! I won't be just another tumorous bore.
And what's more horrifying than a revolution within your own body, where your body is not what you can rely upon anymore, and it's being melded with another part of an uncivilized insect world. It was hard to get an audience in 1986, like today. Something called The Fly sounds cheesy. You think of Vincent Price in the 1950s and all that stuff. So the fact that people went in and saw this kind of sophisticated drama and these characters and this writing and this production value and all of this, it's completely incongruent from what you expect teenagers going in to see a fly monster. It's really kind of brilliant. The movie's called The Fly. It's going to be something really frightening. And then you see it, and it's just there, and it flies, and it's there, and nobody else notices except the baboon, of course, who's annoyed by it.
As the general said, there's nothing I'd ask you to do that I wouldn't do myself, boys. Hey, you're all right. I'm looking at you. I can tell you're okay.
It's just a brilliant use of foreboding and tension, and something big is happening, especially if you're familiar with the original movie, which is also a surprisingly intelligent movie for its time, but it's not like this. Alfred Hitchcock gave a great lesson about this. He talks about the difference between shock and suspense. Right. And he's saying, okay, I can put a bomb under a table of a bunch of people talking, and they're talking and then just suddenly blow it up and they're all killed. That's shock. But if they're talking and I cut to the bomb and then I cut to their faces as they're talking, the audience knows something that these characters don't know, and they're on edge because they know it's ticking and no one else does. So you've got 5 minutes of suspense versus 5 seconds of shock. And it's a very interesting tool to use when you're doing suspense and horror and thrillers.
Just those little touches, like the sound of the fly, and then the fly on the outside, and the fly on the inside, the fly starting to buzz around or fly around silently inside. The really simple special effect of white light and the fog, the mist of something emerging out of this egg. The shape of the thing is not a mistake either, to me. That it is, it's not only teleportation, it's like being reborn. There's a rebirth that's happened here. And what we, the audience, are aware of, that our main character is not aware of, is that the sperm and egg, it's human and fly. And he's not aware of that yet. And I think that maybe a lesser filmmaker or just maybe another take on this that would not have been as effective is to have Seth notice the fly right as the thing was closing and not be able to stop it, because that just takes away so much of the thing. It is this movie, because it is smart and it is about intelligence and it is about pursuit of intelligence. It's not just a fluke thing happens, but that the way that he will try to decipher what is happening to his body will be a scientific exploration, a scientific inquiry into what happened. Why am I starting to change? Why do I feel different? And they often talk about in a horror film that the one character, whether it's the main character or someone else, basically commits a transgressive act that starts this process. And as a scientist, he's supposed to be he's governed by logic, he's governed by science. But he is actually acting out of, like you said, jealousy. He's acting out of, he's been drinking, and he's acting out of, he's taking a major risk that he would not have normally taken except for his emotional state.
With science, and you get punished.
Yeah, and with science, you get punished in this way. Whereas, we built a house on an Indian burial ground, you get punished that way, But that there is this transgressive act that is the trigger for what comes afterwards. But it's not, like I said, it stays true to the character of the scientist by letting him explore the changes, to observe, to follow the scientific method, to ask questions, make hypotheses, reject data, bring in new data. All of that stuff is very, very much in keeping with the character and with our understanding of how the story is developed. It is a metamorphosis. It is a change, because it is this idea of illness. It is this idea of something that is you and isn't you at the same time. Which cancer is. It's a malignant cell. It's the what's the word? Mutation of a cell that keeps growing and growing and growing and growing, and it is you and it isn't you. It is.
And David watched his mother die of cancer,
Yes.
which was again part of the motivation for his take on this movie. And I think we've all faced that too. I've lost family members, and you just can't stop the progression of this disassembly of a life. Sometimes it's long and drawn out, and you're right. It's this train that is unstoppable and heartbreaking, and it captures this so beautifully and emotionally and powerfully. But it's also a chrysalis from which some new species entirely emerges. Right. Not necessarily the best way to evolutionize, but
right, but a very organic and natural one too. But now has been put into this man-made chrysalis, basically. And I think that's a really good other way of looking at it. It's not only the egg; it is the chrysalis, because that is the metamorphosis from the larvae into the butterfly. Right.
Except rather as emerging something beautiful like a butterfly, it's quite the opposite.
Right.
So not all evolutionary stages work out.
Right. He has there's a boon. There's actually a very positive effect. He's empowered by it, and he's able to great. It's like, I've been, whatever happened in that teleportation. Not only did I move from one space to the other, but I'm stronger. I'm smarter. I'm more energetic.
Better.
Yeah.
How you doing? Now you tell me. Am I different somehow?
And that's a very powerful, it's almost like a drug, but it's inside him. Right. He never took something, he never had to imbibe, absinthe or whatever, or anything to see beyond the doors of perception. He did it through scientific method. He did it through this thing, and it's empowered him, and he wants others to experience it. And which is, I think, another thing that's great about that scene is that he's alone, except with the baboon and the fly, right. But it's not something that's done for an audience. It's not something that it's like done in a controlled space. Right. It's like the one guy who's doing the wrong thing because no one is there to tell him you're doing the wrong thing, but he does it.
Well, he's like a newly formed fundamentalist Christian. Seriously, he becomes preacher.
He becomes a proselytizer.
Yeah, he's a proselytizer. And anybody who finds a new philosophy, they want to share it with everybody else or force it on everybody else.
Right.
And in this case, he's such a forceful personality, whereas before he was kind of a milquetoast.
Right.
And now, even sexually, he's like overwhelming for Veronica.
I didn't know you had the skin of a princess. You're real sensitive, huh?
Okay. That's it. You're going to like it.
I don't want to. I'm afraid.
Don't be afraid.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
He's going from intellectual man to primal man by being contaminated by insect. And it's really fascinating because the way David constructs this, the suspension of disbelief is easily had here. It's approached in a very scientific way, maybe a 1986 scientific way in terms of the computer.
Right.
But, with intellect and the assumption that you're going to go along with this because we're playing this for real. We're taking this seriously. We're not looking down to a horror audience. Right. This is for an audience, period.
You see it with the candy bars, He's in this. He's looking for the rush. He's looking to keep the rush going, the sugar rush and the sex rush, and all of these things. And you see that transformation. And what's really good, also, I think, about it, is that it's never black white. There's always shades. There's parts of him that we recognize from the beginning. There's humor,
You look bad. You smell bad.
I've never been much of a bather.
as a writer, to me, feel like it's a lesson I keep learning over and over again. It's not to underestimate the physicality of the actor. And even the way he delivers the line, like I said, the behavior of that line, when he just opens his eyes wider a little bit for a moment, it's like, you can't write that in the script, and if you try to, it's not going to come across the same way. That's, I think, also probably good direction, but having an actor who is so physical. I mean, I think this is probably in a lot of ways a breakthrough role for Goldblum at the same time, because there's a physicality, there's almost a Burt Lancaster acrobatic thing to his stuff, And then when he's got all the makeup on, you still see the humanity in those parts. And I think that's what you get out of Goldblum's performance here. It's impressive to watch and to think about how to try to incorporate that into my own mindset as I'm writing character, as I'm trying to show and not tell, Right.
Oh, that's disgusting. My ear. No. I'm scared.
It's established earlier on that the way a fly eats is that it vomits, it starts digestion process externally. And so it does a sort of bile vomit that begins the process. So when this happens, it's like an even better punchline. Oh, that's disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much in that scene. It's so loaded. But I love that, with the clip we saw earlier, the very first clip, I guess, where he's pursuing her and she's not interested, and now, she's pursuing him. She's like, "Oh my God, maybe we can I can help you." And he's like, "I don't know, it might be contagious." And but he's trying to. He's not deflecting her as much as he's trying to protect her. But this union cannot exist either way. But then she embraces the cancerous tumor that he's becoming.
Yes.
And thinking about your comment about Cronenberg watching his mother die of cancer, and he says, "We can do tests. And I don't want to be a tumorous bore in some, talking about his hair falling out, and there's so many elements that are going on in those scenes where they are aware of, like, being in a coma, being aware of your body without being able to move. There's something that's going on of that in here, because he still has his awareness of what is happening to him and how he's metamorphosizing or metamorphosing and transforming, and it's sort of that terror of being aware of what's happening to you, even though you can't move, or even though you can't, help yourself. And my ear, and the way he even says that line.
It's also, I love how confrontational this is for the audience. It's written, acted, and shot bravely, boldly. It's unflinching. You've got a close-up lens right here watching this fleshly deterioration of man. And it doesn't blink. It doesn't look away. And this is life, and it's life being ripped away in a very visceral, ugly, physical manner that you have to look, and you can't look away because it's like nothing you've ever seen in a movie before. What resonates with you after the credits roll is something that hits you inside, not outside. The blood you're covered in when you walk out of a haunted house is, you can wash that off. But if it's inside the brain and it infects you like the Brundlefly happening, where you carry that disease with you, that is something to fear, and that's something to cherish as an artist.
You've been watching a conversation with Alvaro Rodriguez and Mick Garris on Story. For more On Story, check out our free podcast at onstory.tv or search the iTunes store, and get the book today, On Story, Screenwriters and Their Craft, on Amazon.